بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا عدوي وعدوكم أولياء تلقون إليهم بالمودة وقد كفروا بما جاءكم من الحق يخرجون الرسول وإياكم أن تؤمنوا بالله ربكم إن كنتم خرجتم جهادا في سبيلي وابتغاء مرضاتي تسرون إليهم بالمودة وأنا أعلم بما أخفيتم وما أعلنتم ومن يفعله منكم فقد ضل سواء السبيل. إن يثقفوكم يكونوا لكم أعداء ويبسطوا إليكم أيديهم وألسنتهم بالسوء وودوا لو تكفرون. لن تنفعكم أرحامكم ولا أولادكم يوم القيامة يفصل بينكم والله بما تعملون بصير. قد كانت لكم أسوة حسنة في إبراهيم والذين معه إذ قالوا لقومهم إنا براء منكم ومما تعبدون من دون الله كفرنا بكم وبدا بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء أبدا حتى تؤمنوا بالله وحده إلا قول إبراهيم لأبيه لأستغفرن لك وما أملك لك من الله من شيء ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. ربنا لا تجعلنا فتنة للذين كفروا واغفر لنا ربنا إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. لقد كان لكم فيهم أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر ومن يتول فإن الله هو الغني الحميد. عسى الله أن يجعل بينكم وبين الذين عاديتم منهم مودة والله قدير والله غفور رحيم. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. إنما ينهاكم الله عن الذين قاتلوكم في الدين وأخرجوكم من دياركم وظاهروا على إخراجكم أن تولوهم ومن يتولهم فأولئك هم الظالمون.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليًا أمير المؤمنين حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
هر روزم شده حسرت، هر لحظم شده آرومم. با تو باشم بی تو اما بی پناه. هر روزم شده حسرت، هر لحظم شده آرومم. با تو باشم بی تو اما بی پناه. دیگه دلگیرم از این درد بی درمون دوری، دیگه خستم از این حسرت واسم سخت صبوری. آخه نوکر از اربابش جدا باشه چجوری. دیگه دلگیرم از این درد بی درمون دوری، دیگه خستم از این حسرت واسم سخت صبوری. آخه نوکر از اربابش جدا باشه چجوری. چشم من به دست کرمته، قلب من که خونه غمته، اون که آرزوم حرمته. یا حسین حرم منو به طلب، یا حسین حرم، یا حسین حرم منو به طلب، یا حسین حرم منو به طلب. دور از تو توی این شهر میگیره نفسم، باید از همه دل کن تا به رویام برسم. دور از تو توی این شهر میگیره نفسم، باید از همه دل کن تا به رویام برسم. اگه بارون زده چشمام شده ابر بهاری، تو حواست بهم هست و هنوز هوامو داری.
صلوا على محمد و آل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما. كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا. وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والمترى الموتور، السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله، يا أبا عبد الله، يا أبا عبد الله، لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. ولعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم جميعا إن شاء الله. يا أبا عبد الله، يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان ولعن الله بني أمية قاتبا ولعن الله ابن مرجانا ولعن الله عمر بن سعد ولعن الله شمرا ولعن الله أمتان أسرجت والجماد وتنقبت لقتالك بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. ليل الجمعة يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشياعكم برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحال وبالبراءة من أشيائهم وأتباعهم جميعا إن شاء الله. إني سلم لمن صالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراء من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة. وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله وأن يرزقني طلب الثري مع إمام مهدي هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم، وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيته في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله من صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محيا جميعا إن شاء الله. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت فيه بنو أمية وابن هاكنة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية عليهم منك اللعنة أبد العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم جميعا إن شاء الله. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا 100 مرة. السلام عليك جميعا إن شاء الله. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين 100 مرة. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ به أولا ثم الثانية والثالثة والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجان وعمر بن سعد والشمران وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك. الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم. الحمد لله على عظيم رزيته. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا وجههم دون الحسين عليه السلام.
سنجاب به یاد لبت یک شبم خواب راه نداشتم، کنار تن بی سرت کاسه آب گذاشتم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا دائم الفضل على البرية، يا باسط اليدين بالعطية، يا صاحب المواهب السنية، صل على محمد وآله خير الورى سجية، واغفر لنا يا ذا العلا في هذه العشية. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
For the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, the Savior, the Avenger, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When it comes to the branches of religion, the things that we normally associate with our rules of worship, the legal manual, contractual obligations, purity, and everything from marriage all the way down to inheritance laws. The things that we normally would perhaps associate with matters of jurisprudence. Most people, at least now, acknowledge the importance of following experts in this field. Meaning that as people who are unable to gain expertise in legal matters, and given the gravity, given the significance, the importance of these issues, because they have to do with religion, they have to do with things that are permissible, things that are forbidden, most people would acknowledge that we need to refer to experts. We have been provided with guidelines as to how to identify those experts. For instance, the famous tradition of the 11th Imam, as reported in his famous tafsir, and other scholars such as Al-Hurr al-Amili in his Wasa'il al-Shi'a. This famous tradition in which the Imam outlines the basic fundamental features required for these experts to become sources of emulation. وَأَمَّا مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ حَافِظًا لِدِينِهِ مُخَالِفًا عَلَى هَوَاهِ مُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. As for those jurists, listen carefully to what the Imam is telling us here. He says, as for those jurists, min al-fuqaha, who have these features within them. Number one, صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ. He guards himself, meaning he is disciplined, does not commit acts of sin. He is in full control of his desires and faculties. Then the Imam, in order to further emphasize this, elaborates more. صَائِنًا لِنَفْسِهِ. But also, he is حَافِظًا لِدِينِهِ. Religion, his faith, the value system that he abides by is protected at all costs. حَافِظًا. He protects his religion. What else? مُخَالِفًا عَلَى هَوَاهِ. The rule in his life is that he acts in a way that runs contrary to his desires. That is the rule by which he lives. مُخَالِفًا عَلَى هَوَاهِ مُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَاهِ. And he is obedient towards his master. He recognizes and acknowledges his masters, and he obeys them unconditionally. The Imam then says, if a person who is a jurist ticks all of these boxes, فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَنْ يُقَلِّدُوهُ. The masses are allowed and permitted to emulate this person. Why the word taqleed is used and not another word is an entire discussion in itself. Why the Imam says the masses are able to emulate this person and doesn't say must emulate him is another discussion in itself. That's not the point. What's interesting is what the Imam says after this. He says, وَذَلِكَ لَا يَكُونُ لِجَمِيعِ فُقَهَاءِ الشِّيعَةِ. And this doesn't apply to every jurist. meaning that to have the credentials, the so-called academic or intellectual or scholarly credentials, is not enough. One may have gone through the full course of study. They may have studied under the most qualified jurist for years. The Imam clearly says that's not enough. Because remember, we're not just talking about scholarly credentials. We're talking about matters that have to do with the individual's spirituality and devotion. It has to do with his obedience towards his masters. It has to do with piety. It has to do with akhlaq. So, while the scholarly credentials are an absolutely necessary baseline, but that is not enough. The Imam says this doesn't apply to all of the jurists of the Shia. We're not even talking about others. We're speaking strictly about the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, whose beliefs, whose aqa'id have been verified. And yet, the Imam says that's not enough. Because this only applies لِبَعْضِ فُقَهَاءِ الشِّيعَةِ لَا كُلِّهِمْ. Not all of them are able to satisfy all of these conditions. And so because of that, you end up with disagreements. You end up with discord. You end up with qualified scholars who are pious, who do practice self-discipline, who are illustrious in terms of their scholarly credentials, and yet, because we ultimately live in a time where access to our divine leaders is, for the most part, unavailable, we end up with conjecture playing a part in the process of extrapolation, the process of ijtihad. Which is why scholars are very clear. They even state at the very beginning of their legal manuals, they say that following the rules contained in this manual, مُبْرِئَةٌ لِلذِّمَّةِ إِنشَاءَ. This shall absolve you of your religious duty, God willing. Meaning that we can never say for a fact that everything contained in the legal manual of every scholar to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We can't say that because ultimately we find ourselves at times, yes, there are things in Islam that are absolutely unequivocal, they're very clear. The obligation to pray, no one has any disagreement about that. The obligation to fast in the holy month of Ramadan. The obligation to perform Hajj. All of these things they're a done deal in the sense that no one will dispute these. These are considered essential core components of the religion. And if someone decides to deny these essential core components, what happens? This person becomes munkir al-daruriyat. And there are people like that. You'd be surprised and you'd be shocked. But as we progress further away from the time of the Imams and into this area of darkness and confusion, you're going to find more and more people who deny the most obvious of all facts. And we're seeing this right now. The obligation to perform hijab. You'd think that that's undeniable, but it's not. You'll end up with people who will easily and conveniently deny these most obvious components of the faith. Things that have been accepted for centuries. They have been verified by scholars unanimously. Even other schools of thought and sects and denominations agree. Yet, because the person follows a contrarian attitude, because he wants to be known, and he realizes that he won't stand out if he simply followed the mainstream and followed what is accepted among the scholars, they have to come up with something that is strange and weird and twisted and bizarre and absurd. That's the only way they can get any attention. And so you'll find more and more people doing this. Read my lips, it'll happen more and more often. hijab is not wajib. Because according to some new made-up framework that they've created, which number one gets them the attention and the views that they so desperately seek, and number two, it validates the lifestyle of the people who follow them. It appeases the masses. They're crowd pleasers by their very essence. And so knowing that there is a growing corpus, a growing group of people out there who don't feel comfortable with hijab, who don't want to wear the hijab, but feel uncomfortable with the fact that if they don't wear the hijab, they know that they're committing a sin. So they will seek out someone who will give them that religious seal of approval. They will look for someone who validates their lifestyle and tells them that you are religiously absolved of all of your commitments. You're not doing anything wrong. In fact, you are more pious than others. And so, given the market dynamics of supply and demand, surely we're going to end up with more and more people who try to fill this gap, this void, this market demand. Which is why the Imam stresses this. حافظا لدينه صائنا لنفسه مخالفا لهواه. The Imam basically says the same thing 3 times, and then eventually says, if that is the case, then you can follow that person. Because this has become a form of kryptonite. It's become a form of red mercury. You're going to end up with less and less individuals who tick all of these boxes. But again, as I said, for the most part, people acknowledge that they need to follow individuals who do satisfy all of those conditions, which is great. And if I told you that there is someone out there who doesn't have a source of emulation, doesn't have a marja', your natural instinctive response is going to be, but is this person a practicing Muslim or a non-practicing Muslim? If he or she is non-practicing, well, that's easy to understand. But if they're practicing, how do they practice the laws and obligations of their religion without following an expert in religion? How exactly is that supposed to work? And that reaction is perfectly legitimate. How do they pray if they don't know the laws of how to pray? How do they go to Hajj? Hajj is a good example because it's a very elaborate ritual. There are lots of details, lots of nuances, lots of actions, lots of rituals, rites. So how do you perform Hajj if you don't follow an expert? You're bound either to do one of 2 things. Either you will make up your own rituals and your own sect and your own religion, or you will end up following whoever happens to be seated next to you on the plane, or whoever you see in front of you, right? So you will follow someone, except that someone isn't qualified. They're not experts. So you can see the detriment in all of this. You can see how this is detrimental to a person's religiosity, a person's devotion and sincerity. Because if you're sincere about your religion, you would want to follow the truth, not just anybody who happens to be there with you. Now, here's the question I want you to think about. What about matters of creed? What about our aqa'id? Who sets our aqa'id? How do we know what's what when it comes to the nuances of our fundamental beliefs, the tenets of our faith? Where does that come from? Again, think about this. When it comes to our legal frameworks, when it comes to our daily rituals, acts of worship, contracts, and so on and so forth, you need an expert. When it comes to the fundamentals of the faith, not the branches, the fundamentals, is there a marja'? What qualities should that marja' have? And more fundamentally, let's go back a step. what is the epistemological foundation of our beliefs? Meaning, where do we derive our beliefs? Let's say there is a marja out there that you're supposed to follow, which again, that's a whole discussion in itself. Are we allowed to emulate experts when it comes to matters of belief? I'm sure you would have heard that emulation and taqleed only applies to the branches of religion. And that is true, except it's not the whole truth. It's a point of contention, but I don't want to confuse you. But let's say we go with that. That when it comes to matters of belief, you're not allowed to emulate anyone. Meaning that even a 9-year-old girl who just became baligh, she needs to establish the fundamental tenets of her beliefs on her own. She can't emulate anyone. She can't follow anyone. But let's go with that. Let's say that is true. What about the nuances of her beliefs? What about the intricacies of her beliefs? What about questions? I'll give you some questions as examples. Does the Prophet and his successors have ilm al-ghayb? Do they have knowledge of the unseen? If so, first of all, how do you know? How are you supposed to know? Do you refer to the Quran? Or is it a purely intellectual matter? Because if you have to refer to the Quran, then suddenly there's a whole host of sciences and disciplines you need to acquire before you get to the Quran, before you try to understand the Quran. So which is it? Is it the intellect? Is it the Quran and Sunnah? Or is it the Quran alone? If it is the intellect as well as revelation in both of its branches, revelation meaning the Quran and hadith. If it's the intellect plus revelation, what relationship do these two have with each other? Does one dominate the other? Or are they equal? What if there is any point at which you feel there is a contradiction? How do you remove the contradiction? You see what I'm trying to do here? It's not as simple as you would think. Did our 8th Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha alayhi alaf al-tahiyyati was-salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, did he have knowledge of the fact that those dates had poison in them and that that poison would be lethal if he consumed it? If you refer to the story itself, it's pretty obvious that the Imam did have knowledge of that. Because after eating a few of those dates, al-Ma'mun al-Abbasi alayhi la'inullah asked the Imam to eat even more. The Imam responded by saying what? He said, with these few dates, you have achieved what you set out to achieve. You've done what you wanted to do. Meaning you wanted me dead? This will do the job. So the Imam knew. There's no question there. Then, if the Imam knew, the logical question that will be capitalized on and will be exploited and will be used, as sure as the sun is going to come out tomorrow, you know that there are going to be charlatans and imposters who will exploit this point to make you doubt your religion, even though it really doesn't make a dent in our beliefs as far as the infallibility of the Imams is concerned, as far as the obligation to obey and follow and emulate the Imams is concerned. It doesn't make a difference. But you know for a fact that someone will use it. Someone will exploit this. And so they'll come and say, well, if the Imam knew, then why would he eat something that is lethal? Just like people have asked about whether Imam al-Husayn knew he was going to get killed, and if so, why would he go? Is that considered a form of self-harm? Is that a form of suicide? Right? If he knew, then why would he eat it? And if he didn't know, and this is the main point they want to get to, if he didn't know, then why do you claim that the Imams have knowledge of the unseen? That your divinely inspired and appointed leaders have ilmul ghaib. Surely the Imam wouldn't do something that is detrimental to his health. Surely he wouldn't do something knowing that it would kill him. It's a complex issue presented in an extremely reductive fashion with the express intention of confusing people. In response, our scholars have presented no less than a dozen responses to this and answers to this little predicament. There are answers and responses that we can refer to as negative answers, meaning they negate the issue by presenting another problem that is similar to it, or they have provided solutions to this. As for the negating type of answers, we say, well, did Yaqub know when he sent his son Yusuf with his brothers, did he not know that they would attempt to kill him? In fact, he absolutely knew, which is why he literally told them what they were going to do. Using the knowledge of prophethood, he told them, أَخَافُ أَن يَأْكُلَهُ الذِّئْبُ. I'm afraid, don't take him with you because I'm afraid that the wolf will eat him. So, did he know? The answer is yes. Well, if he knew, then why would he send his Yusuf to suffer in misery for the next 30 years? Why would he do that? Because this is in the Quran, they can't just dismiss it as a fabrication. They can't dismiss it as a hadith that's da'if. And that's their problem. Which is why I've said, and I'll continue to say, their problem is with the Quran. And there will be a day when they will actually deny the Quran. They will begin to mock the Quran. ثُمَّ كَانَ عَاقِبَةَ الَّذِينَ أَسَاءُوا السُّوءَ أَنْ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَكَانُوا بِهَا يَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. Ultimately, their final destination is that they will deny the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the verses of the Quran, and they will make a mockery of them. Ultimately, that'll happen. Just wait for it. But for now, they point their guns and their arrows and their spears at Bihar al-Anwar, at Al-Kafi al-Sharif, because the Quran is too risky for them to attack at this point in time. So, if Yaqub knew, why would he send Yusuf? Because it's in the Quran, you're going to have to come up with what they call convoluted solutions to this problem. So what's the solution you present for this? They'll say, well, because he was commanded by God. And if he's commanded by God, that will override any other potential harm that may come about as a result of this action. Or maybe he knows something that we don't know. Maybe there is another dimension to the story that is beyond my comprehension, right? What if, I want to answer this because I don't want people leaving confused. What if Ma'mun pretended to be a Shia? So much so that some Shia were confused into thinking that Ma'mun was a Shia. Ma'mun would praise Amir al-Mu'mineen. Ma'mun would host gatherings where he would defend the right of Ali ibn Abi Talib to be the Khalifa. Ma'mun acted with sheer hypocrisy. So, now imagine if Ma'mun, who wanted the Imam dead, but the Imam refused to eat those dates, what other option would Ma'mun have to eliminate the Imam physically? He'd have to kill him, wouldn't he? He would have to physically murder the Imam. Now, imagine at a time when Ma'mun pretends to be a Shia. Imam al-Rida, the 8th Imam, is the crown prince. This was a time when the Shia came to prominence, when the followers of the Ahlul Bayt felt that they were invincible. They felt that they didn't have to fear anybody anymore. They didn't live in the time of Harun. They didn't live in the time of Mansur. They didn't live in the time of Abbas al-Saffah. They lived in a time where the government was on their side. Their Imam was the crown prince. So does the Shi'i have any reason to hide his or her identity? No. So now everyone can identify the Shia. If Ma'mun killed Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, would there be no revolt against Ma'mun? Would the Shia not try to avenge the blood of their Imam? Having been exposed, having been identified, the Shia are now going to revolt against the Abbasid Caliph. What do you expect would happen as a result of that? Would we not have an absolute bloodbath? Would we not have massacres on a scale never seen before? Now, if Imam al-Rida is faced with two options, for him to die alone, or for him to die with hundreds of thousands of other Shia, would it then not make sense that the Imam would eat those dates? All it takes is a little retrospection and maybe some familiarity with history. It really doesn't take an individual to be a rocket scientist. But في قلوبهم مرض, because there is a disease in the heart that aims to sow the seeds of doubt and misconception, زادهم الله مرضا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will blind them even to the most obvious of facts. In one hadith, the Imam says that there was doubt, this marad. The Imam explains what it is. He says this is not just any generic disease. This is the disease of doubt. Ash-shak. فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ شَكًّا. Allah will make them doubt everything, even the most obvious of facts. So, I go back to my original question. If we are supposed to follow experts when it comes to matters of jurisprudence, what happens to matters of belief? If I told you that a woman, a virgin, does not need her father's consent for marriage. In fact, it is the man that needs his father's consent for marriage. You're going to laugh at me. Why? If I told you that 17 rak'ah per day is too much. Back in the time of the Prophet, those people didn't have anything better to do. They were herding goats and camels, and so the Prophet said, you know what, let's try and make your time a little bit more productive. So I'll have you spend a sizable amount, a sizable chunk of your day in prayer and worship, 17 rak'ah per day. And in my opinion, 17 rak'at is too much. We're living in an advanced age. We're leading busy lives. And so 17 is too much. How about I give you a discount and it's 7 from now on? You're going to laugh. Why are you laughing right now? It's my opinion. I have the appearance of a scholar, at least. I've got the turban, I've got the beard. I may even use the vernacular. I present my case in a relatively nice way. Why are you laughing? Subconsciously, what you're saying is, who are you to tell us what's haram, what's halal, what's wajib, what's haram? What you're telling me is, with all due respect, you are not an expert. Right? Because fiqh has its people. Jurisprudence has its experts. So who are you? And you'd be right. Why then is it that when it comes to matters of belief, any clown can express their views and we take their word for it? Why? Even our esteemed maraja, they don't claim to be experts on matters of belief in addition to jurisprudence. Just like any other field, just like medicine, a doctor who specializes in brain surgery will not claim to be a specialist in heart surgery, even though they both deal with the anatomy of a human being, and they're both surgeries, and the doctors are surgeons. When it comes to religious matters, to be an expert in jurisprudence does not automatically mean that you're an expert in the tenets of the faith. It's as simple as that. It requires further study and research. When it comes to our jurisprudence, our scholars spend no less than 15 years acquiring the knowledge. And that's if they happen to be extremely talented and gifted and astute. 15 years of non-stop hard labor to acquire the knowledge. Then a further 15 years of teaching the knowledge and passing it down to others, and in the process honing their skills. Part of what a teacher of Dars al-Kharij does is hone his skills. Because by presenting it to your students, who also do their research and conduct their own investigations, they will challenge you. The beauty of Dars al-Kharij is this: the students will challenge the teacher, and the teacher, in most cases, will have the answers to their questions, but oftentimes he might acknowledge and come out and say, I stand corrected. So 15 years of acquiring the knowledge, another 15 years to teach it, that's 30 years. That's a whole generation. That's how long it takes for a faqih to become faqih. Why is it then that when it comes to our matters of belief, suddenly anybody? I have said this before and I'll say it again, my very dear brothers and sisters. Do not take your religion from me or anybody like me. In fact, don't even take your religion from books. Who says that I could just open Al-Kafi Sharif and make my own extrapolations and my own deductions? Who said that? One hadith says, listen to this. One hadith says, have you heard of Zurara ibn A'yan? Right. Most of the hadith in which Imam al-Baqir or Imam al-Sadiq is the source, Zurara happens to be in the chain of transmission. He happens to be the one who heard that hadith from the Imam. True or not true? Right. We have one hadith that says, رحم الله زرارة ابن أعين لولاه لندرست أحاديث أبي. Our sixth Imam says that may Allah bless Zurara, had it not been for him, the traditions and teachings of my father would have been exterminated. They would have been destroyed. In another hadith, the Imam says, لعن الله زرارة لعن الله زرارة لعن الله زرارة. Address this little problem. Just because I'm able to read and I know Arabic alphabets doesn't mean that I could just pick up any book and claim to be an expert. Again, no one is saying you shouldn't read the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt. I, more than many, would advocate for people to read from the sources and go back to primary books. The issue isn't that. The issue is that even within the hadith corpus, as the Imams themselves have told us, we have muhkam, we have mutashabih, we have aam, we have khas. We have ahadith that require other ahadith to make sense. We have hadith that are allegorical. We have hadith that are definitive. It's an entire science of how to read the ahadith and reconcile between them. And I'm not even talking about authentication. Authentication and rijal is a whole beast in itself. But I'm talking about ahadith that have been authenticated. ahadith that have been accepted, and yet they are contradictory. How do you reconcile between them? It's a whole science. And then we have children, and I mean no disrespect, but children who say, let's bring all of these hadith together. Let's translate every hadith into English so as to make them all accessible to the masses. Who says that's how you do it? Who says that's a good thing to begin with? And then use some individual's opinion who happens to be on the very fringes of fiqh to authenticate these ahadith. There are ahadith in al-Kafi which require a scholar, require experts. Yes, there are ahadith which have to do with akhlaq. And those ahadith are worthy of being read by everyone and anyone. There are ahadith which have to do with devotional texts. Du'as, for instance. A du'a is supposed to be read by anyone. Yes. But there are ahadith which have to do with tawheed, which require an expert's opinion. They have to do with nubuwwah, imama, al-ma'ad, al-mabda. There are scholars who devoted decades on these issues. Again, not every marja' gets to do this. But there are maraja' who did. I'll mention this person's name only because he's passed away. Because I don't like to mention names. Ayatollah al-Uzma Mirza Mahdi al-Isfahani was without a doubt a foremost expert on matters of aqa'id. Among his students are Ayatollah al-Uzma Shaykh Wahid Khurasani and Ayatollah al-Uzma Sayyid Ali Sistani, among others. He was a person who taught al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad, meaning what's often called in English eschatology. It's the science and the discipline that has to do with where we came from, the beginning of creation, and the end of creation, meaning the resurrection. He taught this subject for 17 years. That's an expert. You can consult them. If he's not around, his teachers, his students. That's an expert. But for us to sit and listen to any random person in the name of being open-minded, in the name of why not? Why not? Let's listen to what they have to say. الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. What is the meaning of this verse? Who told you that this is a license to listen to anyone? Who said that? Imam al-Ridha says, مَنِ اسْتَمَعَ إِلَى نَاطِقٍ فَقَدْ عَبَدَهُ فَإِنْ كَانَ النَّاطِقُ عن الله فقد عبد الله وإن كان الناطق عن الشيطان فقد عبد الشيطان. If you listen to someone who speaks on behalf of the devil, you have worshipped the devil. But what about the fact that we as Shia are so confident about our faith that we could just listen to anyone and not be afraid? Who said that? That woke Tupac kind of mentality just doesn't work. The question we should ask ourselves is this: what does our religion say? What do our divinely appointed leaders say? If we have to follow them when it comes to the branches of religion, what do you think? Do you not think that they would have some advice and teaching when it comes to the pillar of our faith? Of course they would. And the answer is very clear, brothers and sisters. It's very clear. When it comes to these issues, to the pillars of the faith, to the trunk of our religion, you refer to who? You refer to the Imams. You refer to the Holy Prophet and the Imams after him, right? The Quran itself tells us to do this. لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. The Prophet's role wasn't just a messenger. Wasn't just someone who came to deliver a sealed message from God and then leave us alone to decide what we wish to do with it. He came to teach us, to expand on that message. لِتُبَيِّنَ, to explain the confusing aspects of that message. لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. He wasn't just a mailman. He was a prophet of God. So, the Quran tells us to follow the Prophet. Then the Prophet tells us, عَلِيٌّ مَعَ الْحَقِّ وَالْحَقُّ مَعَ عَلِيٍّ. What does that mean? Think about that for a moment. When the Prophet wants to identify Ali, he wants people to recognize who Ali is, he says, عَلِيٌّ مَعَ الْحَقِّ. Ali will always follow the truth with a capital T. Ali will never deviate from the truth. Ali and the truth have this relationship. Ali always follows it. Then the Prophet doubles down. He says, وَالْحَقُّ مَعَ Ali. What does that mean? Because most people recognize Ali. Christians recognize Ali. Jews recognize Ali. Zoroastrians recognize Ali. Atheists recognize Ali. That's not the problem. The problem is, what is the truth? How do you identify the truth? That's where it gets confusing. That's where the waters are muddied. So the Prophet gives you the answer. He says, wherever you find Ali, you will find the truth. Any time, any place, any location, any confusion, any misconception, wherever Ali is found, the truth is right there with him. Because, وَالْحَقُّ مَعَ عَلِيٍّ. Suddenly it begins to crystallize. It begins to become clear that Allah didn't just leave us to our whims. The Prophet didn't just abandon us for us to sit here 14 centuries later and say, I think this, and in my opinion that. They gave us clear guidelines, clear instructions. In Ziyaratul Jama'ah, what do we say? In ذُكِرَ الْخَيْرِ كُنْتُمْ أَوَّلَهُ وَأَصْلَهُ وَفَرْعَهُ وَمَعْدِنَهُ وَمَأْوَاهُ. You are goodness. You are the truth, right? فَالْحَقُّ مَا رَضِيتُمُوهُ in Ziyarat al-Yasin. What is the truth? It is whatever you've accepted. It's not the other way around. It's not, okay, let's find out what we're supposed to do. No, no, no. Look at where the Ahlul Bayt are. You have your answer. Look at where Imam al-Husayn is. You have your answer. Al-Khawarizmi says in his Maqtal, he quotes this hadith from the Holy Prophet, بِالْحُسَيْنِ تَسْعُدُونَ وَبِالْحُسَيْنِ تَشْقُونَ. It is only through Husayn that you find happiness. And it's through Husayn that you find misery. Meaning that depending on your relationship with Imam al-Husayn, if you align your life with him, you will have nothing but happiness. And if you go against him, you will find nothing but misery. In Ziyarat al-Yasin, this is the quote, listen to this. فَالْحَقُّ مَا رَضِيتُمُوهُ. The truth is whatever you are pleased with. وَالْبَاطِلُ مَا أَسْخَطْتُمُوهُ. And falsehood is whatever you rejected, whatever you despised. وَالْمَعْرُوفُ مَا أَمَرْتُمْ بِهِ وَالْبَاطِلُ مَا نَهَيْتُمْ عَنْهُ. Even when it comes to al-amr bil-ma'ruf wal-nahy an al-munkar. What is ma'ruf? What is the good that we're supposed to enjoin? It is whatever they enjoined. What is the evil that we're supposed to prevent? It is whatever they prevented. Which is why when we say salam to Amir al-Mu'mineen in his ziyarah, Assalamu alayka ya deen Allah al-Qawim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. You are God's religion. كلمة لا إله إلا الله حصني فمن دخل حصني أمن من عذابي بشرطها وأنا من شروطها. They are the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. End of discussion. There's really no need for you to waste your time listening to charlatans and imposters who try to confuse you on these matters. Just ask, what would Al-Baqir say? What would As-Sadiq say? What would Al-Ridha say? What would Al-Jawad say? The Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, what did they say? Look at, the Quran tells us about this light, right? Ayatul Nur. Allah describes it in beautiful, elaborate means, and eventually says, في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. This light is found in where? In these houses. Then, after pointing to a geographic location, meaning the houses, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it even clearer. He says, رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهِ. These are individuals. These are people that you need to follow. Specific individuals. It's not some wishy-washy abstract notion in your head that we're supposed to find. No, follow them. إنما مثل أهل بيتي كسفينة نوح من ركبها نجا ومن تخلف عنها غرق وهوى. These hadith of the Ahlul Bayt, the hadith of Rasulullah that have been unanimously accepted by all sects, all groups, all denominations. إني تارك فيكم الثقلين. How clear does it have to get? كتاب الله وعترتي أهل بيتي ما إن تمسكتم بهما لن تضلوا بعدي أبدا. Inshallah, tomorrow and the night after that, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The implications of hadith al-Thaqalain, and specifically how to use that in order to address all the confusion and the discord that we have in this day and age. What we need to do is to explore the anatomy of doubt, the pathology of doubt, how it works, how it emerges, where it comes from, how to deal with it, how to cure it. Inshallah, we'll talk more about that in the coming couple of nights. But for now, when you make the Ahlul Bayt, listen carefully to this. When you make them and when you recognize and acknowledge them as the ultimate litmus test of the truth, and that they are nothing but the truth, then the grounds for confusion will disappear. The reason people are confused is because this tree doesn't have very firm roots. A tree that doesn't have roots, a little wind will knock it down, right? But a tree with strong roots, you need a bunch of people with axes to try and bring it down. The problem, our brothers and sisters, is that in this day and age, we don't have firm roots. That's why, as the Imam describes many people, Amir al-Mu'mineen in his famous hadith with Kumayl ibn Ziyad, he says that people are either عالم رباني أو متعلم على سبيل النجاة أو همج رعاع أتباع كل ناعق. This group of people, they have no firm backing. لأنهم لم يستندوا إلى ركن وثيق. They don't have something to lean on. They don't have that firm foundation. They don't have a marji'iyya. And I'm not talking about individuals here. Marji'iyya meaning a source of emulation, a backing, something on which to stand. They don't have that. That's why they are atba'u kulli na'iq. That's why somebody comes today and confuses them with one misconception, they'll follow him. Tomorrow there's going to be another person with another misconception and they'll follow him. Ad infinitum. And it just keeps going and going and going. What you need is that solid foundation. What is it? It is the Ahlul Bayt. Somebody comes and tells you, if you see someone being oppressed, should you support them at any cost or not? Most people would say, absolutely. If you ask for proof, they'll say, Imam al-Husayn. Never mind that we've reduced Imam al-Husayn to simply someone who is defending human rights, as opposed to upholding the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never mind that. But the proof is pretty solid. Imam al-Husayn, revolution, armed insurrection, revolt. You have to defend the oppressed. What about Imam al-Sajjad? What about Imam Zayn al-Abidin? Tell me. Imam Zayn al-Abidin lived in the time of the same tyrant Yazid. Same tyrant. Then he lived in the time of tyrants, one more diabolical than the other. I don't want to get into that. 6 of them. In this time, there were massacres committed, there were atrocities perpetrated that would make you sweat simply hearing about them. And yet Imam Zayn al-Abidin did not raise a finger. You see what's happened here? Because we have created our own frameworks for what is good and what is bad, what is true and what is false, instead of following the examples of the Imams themselves, now we're confused. What about Imam al-Sajjad? What about Imam al-Baqir? What about Imam al-Sadiq? And literally every other Imam after Imam al-Husayn. Where's the armed insurrection? Where's the revolution? Where's the struggle? Where's the fight? Yes, Imam Zayn al-Abidin did struggle, which is why even when we say salam to the Imam, we say to every single one of the Imams, أشهد أنك جاهدت في الله حق جهاده. حق جهاده. The ultimate struggle, the ultimate jihad. Even though there was never an armed insurrection against Yazid or any other tyrant. You're only confused when you hear something like this, and that Yazid ambushed the city of Medina and killed thousands and raped thousands and ransacked and pillaged the city of Rasulullah, while Imam Zayn al-Abidin was living on the outskirts of Medina and did not even enter the city. You're only confused by that if you have made up your own mind about what is true and what is false, what is good, what is bad, instead of delegating that to the Imams alayhim salam. Imam Zayn al-Abidin's struggle against the tyrants, even though it was never armed, even though the Imam didn't lay a finger, even though the Imam never fought in a battle, even though the Imam may never have said a word in defense of the oppressed. Not even a word, not even a statement. Despite that, أشهد أنك جاهدت في الله حق جهاد. Imam Zayn al-Abidin's struggle was different from that of Imam al-Husayn. But it was in the same overall pathway to Allah. The point here, and I'll wrap this up, is علي مع الحق والحق مع علي. Look at what the Imam did, and then you'll know what you're supposed to do. Don't make up your own framework and say, let's see if the Imam followed this or not, because that is the ultimate crime that we could commit against ourselves. بأبي أنت وأمي يا ابن رسول الله. What Imam Zayn al-Abidin faced was more painful than if he had been killed on the day of Ashura. The tragedies that he saw, بأبي هو وأمي, were so painful, so grave, so excruciating. The Imam himself wished that he were dead and not have to witness all of these atrocities. What they did to his father, Abu Abdullah, what they did to his brothers, what they did to his uncle, what they did to the women. When he was asked, what was the gravest of tragedies for you, the Imam said, Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham. On the third day after the killing of Abu Abdullah, the women of Bani Asad go to get some water from the Euphrates. Then the men who were back in the village, they noticed the women running towards them saying, come, you should see what we have just seen. They said, while we were trying to fetch water from the river, we saw a battered body with no arms. We saw an arrow planted deep in his eye. We saw that his head was broken with an iron pole. Come, we think this is where the massacre happened. This is the reason the last 3 days the sky has been raining blood. This is the land on which Husayn and his family were massacred. How dare you sit under your roofs when Husayn's body is lying on the sand? The men of Bani Asad rushed to Karbala, to the site of the massacre of Ashura. When they arrived there, They had come in order to bury the bodies, but how could they bury bodies they cannot even recognize? They were left perplexed and confused. What do we do with all of these bodies? It was at that time when they had sent a man to keep an eye and make sure that Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad doesn't come. They had been warned that if anyone buries the bodies of Abu Abdullah, they would be killed. Then that man came rushing to them saying that I am seeing someone approach you. So they removed themselves from the scene. When that person came, they noticed that he was wearing a mask, but that the mask had become wet from his tears. They said, who are you? He said, I am your Imam. Ana imamukum Ali ibn al-Husayn. I am your Imam and I am here to bury my father's body. وأهل بيته وأنصاره. I am here to do what I am supposed to do as an Imam. The Imam then said to them, come and help me. They had dug two graves, one for Bani Hashim, the other was for the Ashab, the Ansar of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn. When they came to help the Imam with Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, the hadith says Imam Zayn al-Abidin told them, don't, فَإِنَّ لِي مَنْ يُعِينُنِي. I have those who will help me with my uncle. He came to his uncle Abbas. He said, عَلَى الدُّنْيَا بَعْدَكَ الْعَفَايَا. Oh uncle, this world is not living anymore after you. This was where Abu Abdullah said, الآن انكسر ظهري وقلت حيلتي. Imam Zayn al-Abidin buried his uncle Abbas. Then he went towards his father. He asked Bani Asad not to help him. He said, I have angels to help me. Maybe Rasulullah was there to help Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatima al-Zahra. He didn't need their help. He lowered the body into the grave. The Imam then said, طابت أرض دفنت فيها أما حزني فالسرماد وليلي فمسهاد. They saw the Imam then pick something up from the ground, a small object. He removed the dust off of it, then he kissed it and placed it on his eye. They said that we looked closer and it was the finger of Abu Abdullah. أجرك الله يا صاحب الأمر والزمان. كانت سبابة الحسين. When the Imam was ready to bury Abu Abdullah, he then placed his ear on the throat of his father. He heard something from Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, reminding him to do one more thing. The Imam then got up and he carried the body of Ali al-Asghar. He brought it to his father. لا تدفن الطفل إلا عند والدي فإنه لا يطيق اليتم في الصغر. He placed Ali al-Asghar on the chest of Abu Abdullah, their throats touching each other. Aywa waylah wa Husayna. Imam Zayn al-Abidin then came out after the burial. He then wrote something on the grave of the Imam using his hand. He said, هذا قبر الحسين بن علي بن أبي طالب الذي قتلوه عطشانا غريبا.
عادة الميت يحضرون أهله، هذا جايب جفن هذا يفصله، وهذا جايب ماي هذا يغسله، وذاك يحفر قبر ذاك ينزله. هاي عادل ما جروها بكربلاء، ظل 3 أيام عاري بالفلا. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون، والعاقبة للمتقين.
يا حسين 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 يا حسين. With your voices inshallah. يا حسين Husayn, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Oh Murtaza Ali, your Husayn is now a shaheed. Together inshallah brothers, you're going a bit faster than I want. Inshallah, with your voices, we say to Abba Abdullah, we say what is happening in Najaf. Flying from Karbala, raise your hands and say with me. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Oh Murtaza Ali, your Husayn is now a shaheed. Oh Murtaza Ali, your Husayn is now a shaheed. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Flying from Karbala to Najaf is Jibreel. Oh Murtaza Ali, your Husayn is now a shaheed. Al-Him Gof Nuhu al-Husayn. Al-Him Gof Nuhu al-Husayn. نور عز الحسين والسلام على الحسين. يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين. Oh, the one whose puppet was the streets of the city of Sham. Oh, the one whose puppet it was the streets of the city of Sham, and the moons of your sky were on space reciting the Quran, with an army of martyrs led my way, those and orphans, with an army of martyrs led by way, those and orphans you defeated the tyrant from the streets and the presence all alone. Oh Ali al-Kufar, like Ali all alone. Oh Ali al-Kufar, like Ali, what have your eyes not seen? Ya Zayn al-Abidin, Ya Ali, Ya Sajjad, 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 Ya Ali, Ya Ali, Ya Sajjad, Ya Ali. When your hands you would raise, they would get heavier as you'd pray all your life in ruku, as your back was broken from the chains, till the end your heart in pain from sorrows. It was enchained till the end, your heart in pain from sorrows. It was enchained. Even now around your grave you are surrounded by chains, through the tears of your eyes and the tears of Zahra I can see tragedy lamenting Karbala. Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn. Let your voice read Karbala, Ya Husayn. MashaAllah, Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Karbala, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Karbala. One by one they would go as they fell. Zainab was losing hope when we lost my brothers, and Abbas, how did my father cope? After you, Ali Akbar, Husayn's vision was taken. After you, Ali Akbar, Husayn's vision was taken. Since you fell, oh my uncle, Husayn's back has been broken. Husayn's back has been broken. All alone on this place, who is with you, Husayn? All alone on this place, who is with you, Husayn? When you cried out for aid, only your killer came. Ya Husayn, 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 Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Ya Husayn, Husayn, Husayn. Husayn, Ya Husayn, 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 Ya Husayn. Even if they burnt my body, Ya Husayn. Even if they burnt my body, Ya Husayn. Or in pieces they would cut me, Ya Husayn. Even if all of the world were against me, even if all of the world were against me, I will never leave you, O son of Ali. Husayn, 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 Ya Husayn, 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 Ya Husayn. All of my life calling your name, oh Husayn. All of my life calling your name, oh Husayn. I beat my chest for the love of you, Husayn. So when I die, upon my shroud write this name. So when I die, upon my shroud write this name. I'm a servant and my master is Husayn. Husayn, 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 oh Husayn, 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 oh Husayn. What is there for those who don't love you, Husayn? What is there for those who don't love you, Husayn? There is no love like the love of you, Husayn. If they ask me about heaven, what's the way? If they ask me about heaven, what's the way? I say go to Karbala and find Husayn, 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 oh Husayn, 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 ya Husayn. Assalamu alayka يا غريب كربلاء يا مظلوم يا أبا عبد الله.
اللهم بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها عجل اللهم فرج إمام زماننا يا الله 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 يا الله. اللهم اجعلنا من أصحابه وأعوانه ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج والعافية والنصر. اللهم ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة الحسين وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين. اللهم تقبل أعمالنا، اللهم اغفر ذنوبنا، اللهم كفر عن سيئاتنا، اللهم ارحم موتانا إلى موتى المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومن مضى من هذا الجمع. نهدي لهم ثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
ای غریب
محسن تو غرق خونه، چجوری کشتنت بمونه. میگن امام رضا بیدونه، آب ندادنت بمونه، روزه پیرنت بمونه، غارت شد تنت بمونه. میخون نشناختمت چی اومده سرت، نشناختمت بلا غسل ولا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من، بلا غسل بلا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من. آخرش انگشتر رو بردن، تنو گذاشتن سر رو بردن، سر علی اکبر رو بردن، کتک زدن رقیه جانو، ببین نگاه نگرانو، خدا نبخش ساربانو. کشته کربلا نشناختمت بی سر و بی ردا، نشناختمت به زیر نیزه ها، نشناختمت بلا غسل ولا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من، بلا غسل بلا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من. جنگو به خیمه کشوندن، خیمه زینب و سوزوندن، فاتحه حرم رو خوندن. از این حرم یه عده زن مون، از تو فقط یه پاره تن مون، تن تو بی غسل و کفن مون. مقطع تنت نشناختمت چجوری کشتنت، نشناختمت گم شده پیرنت، نشناختمت بلا غسل ولا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من، بلا غسل بلا کفن. مظلوم من، مظلوم من، مظلوم من. ای قریب مظلوم